Right, so as we gear up for the US presidential election, with voters going to the polls on Tuesday, it is in one significant way almost a copy of our general election here in the UK from July, in that never have there been two less inspiring and depressing candidates that one or the other is destined for power. Where in our case it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that the brylcreemed borefest Keir Starmer was going to take the win, the con job pulled on the British public that he represented change when he intended to deliver anything but. In the US, the polls are too tight to call, though I'm sure a great many Liberals are wailing into the pumpkin-spiced lattes they're drinking right now at the sign that things may just be turning Donald Trump's way. And how daft is that from an outside perspective, that a criminal who has literally told you that immigrants are eating cats and dogs in Ohio is still anywhere in the running, let alone perhaps pulling ahead? It's not like his position on the Middle East is a good one either, when Netanyahu, for one, is hoping he wins. But it is Kamala Harris who only has herself to blame for that by refusing point blank to say she'd cut Israel off, instead pledging to carry on where Joe Biden leaves off. Headline polls might not imply a huge lot of damage being done, things very much within margins of error, but a poll of Muslim voters carried out in the US shows exactly why Harris should be worried, because amongst said voting demographic, Jill Stein's Green Party now leads. Right, so they thought of America voting a third way, stepping away from both Republicans and Democrats, and a consequence in no small part due to the ongoing, never-ending funding of the Israeli genocide by the US state, paid for by the US public when disaster relief funding ends up being hard to come by, yet Israel just needs to shake its baby rattle and spit its dummy, and Joe Biden's administration can't seem to open the nation's checkbook fast enough. So it is that Kamala Harris has said things will continue just the same under her tenure in charge, and as a result of that, her having a tenure at all looks a lot shakier than really it ought to be. Donald Trump was an awful president who did untold damage to people's lives, led an insurrection when he wouldn't accept he lost the last election, and now might get voted in again, now having been indicted on multiple counts of criminality and coming out with the most batshit racist nastiness that has become synonymous with his brand. Harris should be kicking his backside, much like Keir Starmer kicked Rishi Sunak's here in the UK. I suppose the difference is that Harris is just more honest with the public about her intentions, because Starmer, well, he fed the UK a pack of lies, which is very much his brand. He, of course, is now getting punished for that, though, having become rapidly the most hated British Prime Minister after 100 days in office in British history, having delivered a budget full of more Tory party-style pain and austerity, and as a result, the Tories now lead the polls here in the UK again for the first time in 3 years. But how ridiculous is it here, again, that the party that did so much damage for 14 years is now leading in the polls again? Come on, people. Wake up. But the Harris slide in voter intention is by looking at top-line figures not immediately obvious, because she and Trump are pretty much neck and neck. No, it takes another poll to really expose the damage that headline figures might not actually be reflecting, and it's still a difference maker, even if it is a rather small overall amount of percentage, shall we say. This is a poll that's been carried out by the Council of American-Islamic Relations, or CARE, which is the largest Muslim civil rights and advocacy organisation in the US. And the results are staggering, given where Green Party candidate Dr. Jill Stein sits in national polling state by state, getting around 1% of the vote, maybe 2% of the vote. Yet when you consider the number of people who identify as Muslim in the US sits at around 1.34% of the national population, perhaps that is reflective of this poll's findings, in which case. When you factor in the fact that most of these voters tend to vote Democrat, that these are Harris voters on paper that she's losing, or at least should be, that problem escalates. Now, Stein isn't picking up all of these votes. Of course, she isn't going to get all of them, but she does lead Harris amongst them. And if you aren't aware of this poll, well, I happened to cross it in Turkish media, not US, as this excerpt from Anadolu Agency on this story explains the results. According to the poll released just days before Election Day, 42.3% of respondents favoured Jill Stein, with Harris close behind at 41%, echoing the statistical tie seen in CARE's August survey, where both candidates each garnered 29% support. Angered by the White House aiding the Gaza genocide with arms and support on the international stage, some 9.8% of Muslim voters plan to vote for former President Donald Trump, similar to the 11.2% he received in an August poll, CARE said. The poll, done amongst 1,449 verified Muslim voters on October 30th to 31st, has a 95% confidence interval and a margin of error of 2.5 percentage points, the group added. Only 5% of respondents said they currently do not plan to vote, while nearly all others say they will cast their ballots. Edward Ahmed Mitchell, Keir's deputy director, highlighted the significance of these results, saying it is unprecedented for a third-party candidate to get substantial support amongst Muslim voters. That goes to show once again the significant role that the Gaza genocide concern is playing among American Muslim voters, Mitchell said, referring to the Israel's 13-month onslaught on the Gaza Strip, killing over 43,000 people, most of them women and children, and injuring over 101,000 and subjecting the Strip to a harsh blockade of needed aid. Now, Harris could have said she'll turn her back on Israel because of all of this, but she can't afford to, such as the issue of politicians being bought and paid for. Here in the UK, when Starmer and Sunak went head-to-head in July, neither would turn their back on Israel, bought and paid for by the Israel lobby, as both were. Same goes in the US, Kamala Harris having taken more than $500,000 from the Israel lobby, according to Code Pink, last August, and having likely taken plenty more since. Trump is no different. When have you known him not to take money from anyone? But Harris representing the incumbency means this hurts her more. And obviously the ongoing news coming out of Israel and Gaza and Lebanon, all made possible by US military aid, shines this spotlight on her going into the elections, and her camp know it. Despite Trump's renowned racism, some Muslim and Arab groups, as that poll, those findings by Keir made clear, they are considering backing him over Harris. And the experienced campaigners are finding in WhatsApp groups and on the doorstep, Harris campaigners, is telling, as this Middle East Eye excerpt demonstrates, covering the experiences of one such Harris campaign group. But organisers in the group have repeatedly conceded that anger and frustration on the ground is visceral, and convincing Muslim voters to endorse the Democratic nominee is proving difficult, and at times impossible. Unfortunately, polls are not looking good, and reality on the ground is different, Ahmed Jamal wrote earlier this week. We will keep trying and advocating, but unfortunately the campaign had not done enough to earn the votes of Muslims, progressives, Pakistani and Gen Zs. Their unconditional supports for Israel will cost them and this election. I hope and pray I am wrong, but writing is on the wall and the electoral map is looking very bleak, Jamal added. Rather doom-mongery, isn't it? So is it all over for Harris in reality then, despite how tight the polls appear? Well, whilst some Muslims are endorsing Trump now, the vast majority won't touch that racist narcissist for anything. But as those numbers for Jill Stein show, they aren't necessarily going to back Harris regardless, and many are so angry, or angered upon even being asked to back Harris. And there is a generational aspect to that too, where younger people are turning away from establishment parties, and that is being seen in the UK as well, with many turning to our Green Party, which, unlike those across Europe, aren't calling for Stein to step down and give Harris a free run, because that isn't democracy, and would just more than likely disenfranchise Muslim voters further, rather than switch them onto Harris. But Trump isn't the answer to ending matters for the US in Israel either. He's too close to Netanyahu, and he raised tensions in the Middle East with the assassination of Iranian commander Qasem Soleimani, and he literally helped create the conditions that eventually led to October 7th itself, with the so-called Abraham Accords, which were a naked attempt to strip Palestinians of the little bit of diplomatic leverage they had, which was normalization between the State of Israel and the other Arab states surrounding Israel, establishing trade deals between those states and Israel, and therefore putting them on a more pro-Israel footing. This isolated the occupied Palestinians' territories all the more, and emboldened Israel to become even worse, even eyeing up the land grab that now seems obvious to the world as a possibility. Whichever way the election goes in the US next week, the issue of Israel is deciding it. And if Harris loses it by promising to be continuity genocide Joe, then she only has herself to blame for that. Meanwhile, the US can certainly at least content itself that it isn't the only nation whose politicians are becoming a pariah over the matter of Israel to their own people, as the UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy stood up in Parliament this week and denied that what was happening in Gaza was a genocide because apparently not enough people have died yet. Get the details of that story in this video recommendation as your suggested next watch, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.